Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Laura Hanson, and I'm the Transportation Engineer with the City of Northampton Department of Public Works. It's great to see you in the audience. The reason we're doing this is because we have, we want to discuss speed humps on the Northampton streets. And I'm hoping that Fire Chief Duggan will still show up any minute, but we also have Sergeant Trushaw here from the Police Department. Dave Narkowitz is still the chairman of the Transportation and Parking Commission. I'm going to ask him to speak in a few minutes about our traffic calming manual. There's a copy over there. And we have a few guests tonight, Kevin Dandre and Jennifer Williams from TEC out near Boston. And they're actually with the Safe Routes to School program for Jackson Street School, and they've proposed a few speed tables on Jackson Street. So I thought this was a good opportunity to bring forward concerns and discussion about speed humps on the Northampton streets. So I think I'll ask Dave to maybe give a little history about the traffic calming manual and how it came about in Northampton. Okay?
Thanks.
Thanks,
Laura. Thanks to Jennifer and Kevin for being here tonight, and for Officer Trushaw for being here, and for all of you for coming out to talk about this issue. I'm David Narkowitz. I'm a city councilor. I'm also the chair of the Transportation and Parking Commission. And Laura asked me just to give a quick sort of history of sort of traffic calming in Northampton. It really dates back about 10 years ago during the Vision 2020, which was a neighborhood planning process. And one of the goals that came out of that was a desire to calm traffic in neighborhoods and village areas of the city. And that, in turn, spawned a mayor's task force on safer streets that was appointed by Mayor Ford in 2000. And again, one of the things that came out of it was this issue of how do we make our streets and neighborhoods safer. That in turn led to a transportation plan that we worked on with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in 2002, where we really took a comprehensive look at all modes of transportation in Northampton. And again, one of the things that percolated to the top again was this issue of traffic calming. Out of that transportation plan came the creation of the Transportation and Parking Commission in 2003. That was appointed. I was actually one of the charter members. Our first chair, former City Councilor Alex Giesland, is here in the audience. And we then took that task on, not just that task, but looking at all of our city policies, and we promulgated a set of transportation policies in 2005, which again included this notion of how do we come up with a policy and a process for doing traffic calming. So late last year, after a lot of research, a lot of outreach, including some of the public input that was gathered during the Sustainable Northampton process, we released a traffic calming manual, which sort of, first of all, affirmed this goal that the city has made towards trying to make our streets safer, laying out what we feel are the benefits of traffic calming for Northampton, and setting up a process where we could objectively look at concerns raised by neighborhoods about dealing with this problem on their streets. So you can download it on our website at northamptonma.gov/TPC. There are copies here. And you can see that there's a whole application process. There's a prioritization process that we work with the DPW on. But one of the other aspects that we talked about in the process was really trying to pilot some of these engineering methods on our streets, which is one of the reasons I'm particularly excited about this Jackson Street School Safe Routes to School project, because it's really going to be a great sort of laboratory and model for us to look at how some of these things actually will work on our streets. We have a similar thing happening with the state hospital redevelopment, where there's a number of traffic calming features that have been incorporated both on-site and off-site. So that's another area where we're really trying to learn about this technology so that we can replicate it in other parts of the city. And of course, one of the issues that we've run into is, and it's one of the issues we're going to talk about tonight, is sort of the intersection of the need for traffic calming, but also the requirements of our public safety departments. And so that was one of the things I think that spawned putting together this discussion so that we could really hear what the issues are from public safety, as well as hear some of the research and engineering expertise from the folks from TEC. And so, again, I welcome everyone here tonight, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. And I saw the chief come in, so I think I'm going to move aside. Oh, he's here. Okay. I didn't want to take your seat. So. Excellent.
So, Larry, would you like me to?
Yeah,
talk about it?
yes, thank you.
So first of all, from the fire, emergency response, and public safety perspective, I think we're advocates of traffic calming and safety in general. I think what we brought to the table is sort of a perspective of we need to sort of measure twice before we cut once and make sure that we're not going to create a problem either with response time, patient care, damage to vehicles, and so forth. We spent the better part of a day with Sergeant Trushaw and some other folks actually taking our vehicles over different designs of raised structures and looking at how that would affect our vehicles. We did that because the town of Amherst had a less than positive experience pertaining to raised structures, especially on primary response routes. So one of the first things is we sat with Lori and we came up between police, fire, and ambulance. What are our primary response routes and what are secondary response routes? And those are the routes that get us into the various parts of the city. We're trying to meet national standards when it comes to emergency medical response, 4 to 6 minutes to, in a critical situation, make a difference. When it comes to fire response, no more than 8 minutes. And to get there in that time, any impediment sort of slows that process. So there are remote areas of the city that we need to be cautious of. There are also sort of some clusters of roadways that might lead to the hospital or other things. And I think this is an example of where police and fire really work together with DPW, and we did a very good job trying to be realistic about what are the things that we need to do that. And in those areas, really look at what are some other solutions beyond some of the raised structures. Now let me tell you a little bit about the town of Amherst. We invited Chief Hoyle here tonight, but he's in a knife fight over budgets here tonight, so a common thing. Since Amherst College put in raised structures along Route 9, there have been several incidents, some of which have affected patient care. Chief Hoyle also mentioned that even with the raised structures, there was still a fatality in the last year on one of those. And that since they've been in, a lot of it is as people are going to an emergency, yes, they know the structures are there, but they're trying to navigate through traffic, and upon approach, if they come to a full and complete stop and then slowly proceed, that tends to work well. But they've had 2 ambulances, the front ends have had to be replaced, 1 engine company that the front end needed significant work, and one where the leaf springs, sort of the springs under the water tank over the rear wheels, actually fractured. So that's their experience in a short period of time. Again, not on other than the primary and secondary emergency response routes, in this case Route 9 that they use all the time. So as we've been working together, I asked Chris Norris to come. He can talk a little bit about ambulance traffic, patient care. He's our deputy chief in charge of emergency medical services, and that really factors into this. But I wanted to sort of share those experiences so we work together to avoid them happening. And that's why we invested the time, and I'm sure it was videotaped, and it was on the DPW website, I believe, with all our different vehicles and some of the problems we had that even at 20 miles an hour, they'd bottom out, and we had a couple of questions on how that would affect the springs and so forth. We put the council president, Jim Dostal, in the back as a patient and said, what do you think? How was your back if it was broken? Was it a good ride or not? And did some unique things along that line. So Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about ambulances and a little bit about response times and a little bit about patient care?
Yeah, and as the chief mentioned, one thing also that needs to be taken into consideration is the emergency vehicles for both fire and EMS. It's not like your typical passenger vehicle. These vehicles weigh in excess, the engines are in excess of 18 ton. The ladder truck is over 40 ton. And your typical ambulances, depending on the size and what they're carrying, can anywhere from 3 to 5 ton. And with that being said, with these structures in the road, with your passenger car, you can go up there and slow down a lot quicker and get going a lot faster afterwards. you have these heavier vehicles, you need to take into consideration a greater distance to start slowing down, and then a longer time after you clear that impediment to get going afterwards. On the patient care aspect of it, even with the newer technology out there, a lot of these newer ambulances have air ride or airbags in the back. And over your typical bumpy roads, you kind of float in the back up and down. But when you hit that big bump or any type of speed bump like we're talking about, and if you're a type of patient that might have to be placed on a backboard, it's definitely going to have an impact on the patient care side of the ambulance. So it is going to affect how we respond both to the scene and to the hospital, and between the patient in the back and also the technicians working in the back. Obviously everyone understands that just because we're in the back, they're going to the hospital, there's still things that the paramedics are required to do, whether that means start an IV or administer medications or continually watch that person on a cardiac monitor. And the slightest bump or anything like that, it's going to throw off how that cardiac monitor reads on there. So there are a few variables and factors that affect how we do our job out there with these.
And I think ultimately, as we consider these, the idea is to work together, but really work together in a context of considering this risk. And it's really sort of a risk management decision that we want the best outcome. Through David, we were having a conversation one night about, how many fires do we have in a certain area, and if there was a raised structure, and let's even assume a vehicle had to stop and then proceed, it was a 30-second difference, what does that mean? There are truly critical situations where that means a lot. And I think we've got to balance that risk with what's the benefit of a raised structure versus what other technologies might be there. I can tell you that both Williams College, some on Smith, on Elm Street, and over in East Hampton at Williston don't have so much the raised structures, but have textured structures and the lighting, the LED lighting that goes with them that might accomplish a crosswalk or something like that. Is that an area we could talk about? But there are all things, and we wanted to really have a public conversation about this to share our concern so we're making decisions as a community collectively.
All set? Okay. Thank you, Chief Duggan and Assistant Chief Norris. I just want to say hello and welcome to the people that came in late. I'm Laura Hanson from the DPW, and I have a sign-in sheet that I'd like you to sign in. If I can pass this around, is it this row here? I forgot to mention earlier that there's a few handouts. One is just the agenda tonight, if you want one, and there's a Safe Routes to School handout, and there's also copies of our Traffic Calming Manual in Northampton, so you're welcome to take those. So one thing I didn't mention is what the plan is for tonight is to hear from emergency response personnel. I'm going to turn over to Sergeant Trushaw in just a minute, and then we'll hear from our folks from the Safe Routes to School program, and then we were going to open it up for public discussion. So I'll turn over to you, Sergeant Trushaw.
Yeah, we had this discussion. The thing I remember the most about being up there on Meadow Street that day was we have our sedans are basically Crown Victorias with maybe a little more beefier suspension than most passenger cars have. But if you have a Toyota or a Volvo, pretty much the same thing, or a diesel car, we can go over them no problem. Which means to me that a lot of passenger cars can too. Honestly, the quicker you go over it, the less of a bump there is. Watching the larger vehicles go over there at even 10 miles an hour, with a steady 10, that thing jumped all over the place. You could hear the springs going up and down. So the police concerns aren't that much. We can get over them. We can respond through them and get by, not a problem. But as far as the other side of the public safety, there's a real issue with it. And we're talking damage, very expensive trucks. I don't know the exact cost of those trucks, Chief, but
more than you want.
I know they're more than our sedans. And they last a lot longer too. They're a lot of years. They try to get out of these vehicles. So the police side of it is, talk to Chief Sinkwitz. His response to me was, knowing I was coming here, that we can get over them, we can get by them, but obviously we all work together. And I think that's what, again, what this meeting is about, is trying to work together to find a good solution. Whether this will work, won't work. The primary route thing has me concerned as well. Jackson Street, for the fire department, is one of their routes to get from their department up to, like you say, to the Prospect Street area, and I believe the Bridge Road area too as well. Sometimes they'll go the other way, but it is one of the ones they use a lot, especially the ambulance trying to get out. I see it every day going down Jackson.
And there's also a lot of ambulance traffic coming into the communities as we mapped out routes. It's not only our services and what's coming up to be close to 6,000 calls that we do in a given year, but it's also the other services from the region that come to Coley Dickinson Hospital. So that's from across the river out to Amherst, Hadley, and then all of the hill towns coming down in. They have an effect on that too.
All set? Kevin, would you like to say a few words?
Be great. My name is Kevin Dandrade. I'm project manager for the Safe Routes to School program. Can everybody hear me? Okay. We're working with the Executive Office of Transportation, otherwise known as EOT. They are the group out of Boston that manages all the different planning programs for the state that relate to transportation. What happens often is the ideas that start with EOT end up getting constructed by Mass Highway, another state agency. This is an opportunity where there are 100% federal funds that can be used to try to improve the walkability in the environments around schools, primarily elementary schools, but can go as high as middle schools as well. Some of the, just introduce myself, with me is Jennifer Williams. She's one of my lead engineers at TEC, and she spearheads a lot of the Safe Routes to School stuff every day with me. The purpose is to try to enable and encourage children to walk to school. There is a trend towards obesity in children, and the federal government and the Center for Disease Control has identified early action items for getting children involved in exercise. And one of the ways that we can do that is to try to reverse the trend of the pickup and drop-off that you see at a lot of schools, which not only clogs traffic patterns and causes more conflicts for pedestrians, but it is one of the factors that leads to less active children. This involves both pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic, and in some communities that we've run into, and although it's been a handful, they don't allow bicycling to school. Does Northampton allow bicycling? I'm assuming they do because of the bike trail. And it was one thing that we had identified as needing stronger connections from some of these facilities. But ultimately it's to encourage a healthier lifestyle. Again, I mentioned that this is programmed by EOT, but it's funds that have come down from the federal government. Does not require a state match and does not require a local match to try to get these improvements in place. We work with Mass Rides, and you may see their symbol in places along the highway that relates to commuting options. But another facet of what they do is the encouragement and enrichment side of the Safe Routes to School program. In other words, meeting with the school staff, meeting with the community and the students themselves to go through programs of pedestrian and bicycle safety, to have an encouraging programs to track how many kids are biking and walking to school, and they have fun things that they do to try to track that. In fact, I was in one school that was, walk your way to Hawaii, and that they would track their miles, and all the kids' miles joined together. They would keep a bar chart going across the country and then across the Pacific. But that's something that Mass Rides helps to spearhead. We're engineers and we're planners, and we deal with the infrastructure side. And that's one of the E's of the program, is the engineering. These are some of the players that are involved. Our client is actually EOT. They work closely with the folks that manage construction of the highways in the state. That's Mass Highway, and I already mentioned Mass Rides. We have a team on our side, and we're consultant to the state, and we have other specialists that have joined us. The Planners Collaborative out of Boston, Von Grossman and Company, the National Center for Bicycling and Walking, and our construction partner, Kodiak Corporation. The Jackson Street School is one of the earliest to be involved in the Safe Routes to School program. Principal Agnew is very passionate about the program, very supportive, and a very dynamic school and parent involvement, which leads to a lot of children walking and bicycling. This is just a locus map of the area. Jackson Street in here, Route 5, the hospital is located over here. And what we've done to date is we've generated what is a draft assessment. There are multiple copies here, but it flips over. Let me pull out one copy. It's a planning document that looks at some of the recommendations based on our observations and working with the community for what may be appropriate elements of infrastructure that we can put in place. This is a very important meeting because we can gather input that will help shape the final document. Ultimately, the goal of the program is to get infrastructure built to encourage children to walk to school. The state is very anxious to spend money, which is a good thing. They want to use these federal funds in a prudent manner and one that has consensus from the local community. Jackson Street is a collector roadway. Some of the observations that we had during arrival and dismissal periods was that speeds need to be managed. There's still motorists and certainly in the morning peak hour, commuter traffic using Jackson Street as a cut-through. There could be improved access to the bikeway, which is almost immediately adjacent to the school property. And it's a piece of infrastructure that's already built and very well maintained that we can complement with better and stronger sidewalk connections. The crosswalks across Jackson Street need better definition. They do employ crosswalk at one location today, but they could really use a second one. The driveway throat to the Jackson Street School is very wide. It can very generously accommodate turning buses as well as fast-moving parent traffic. So there are things that we could do to try to define that a little bit better. And then again, other path connections to the adjacent neighborhoods. You'll see breaks and fences that go to the outlying streets behind. And although those streets may not have sidewalks, there are certain places where a new piece of sidewalk would make some sense. When we go into a community, we do an initial sidewalk inventory for the streets that are in closest proximity to the school. The school is located here. In this orange dashed line is the Northampton Bikeway. Barrett Street, and on Barrett Street, the green depicts a sidewalk on the south side of the street. The red indicates that there's no sidewalk on the north side. You can see that along Jackson Street, there's a good strong sidewalk on the easterly side. This depicts the location of a crossing guard. And in some of the outlying streets to the west and to the north don't have sidewalks. It's not necessary to have a sidewalk in every street. Certainly that's ideal from a pedestrian perspective. But a lot of these streets are such a low volume that the mix of pedestrians and vehicles is not a paramount concern at this time. It's really where we get to some of the collector roadways and certainly arterial streets where it becomes more of an issue. We identified some opportunities to try to improve the walking and bicycling environment. Again, here's the school, and it's oriented in a different way. North is to the right. But some improvements along Jackson Street in this area, and I'll show those in better detail in a moment. Up on Blackberry Lane, possible sidewalk link up here as school children exit to the west, out to Blackberry to cross Ridgewood Terrace and then get over to the bikeway at a different location. Other secondary improvements would be trying to better define curb lines and pedestrian crossings at Prospect Street. and then a new sidewalk connection on the westerly side of Jackson Street in this location. As we look in greater detail at the Jackson Street improvements, here's the driveway to the school. There's a current crosswalk in this location right here, and this is where the crossing guard stands. But there's also a significant amount of crossing traffic right here. This is right at the driveway location, and there's a lot of crossing that occurs, especially for the denser residential, which lies to the northeast over here. There is a current planned city project for a ramp connection that goes from the bikeway up to Jackson Street. We're working with the planning director, Mr. Fiden right now, as well as Laura, to try to define flexibility in our program where we may be able to possibly take that on as part of the Safe Routes to School work and save the city some construction funds. With that connection in place that comes down from the bikeway elevation up to Jackson Street, looking at a widened sidewalk which could accommodate bikes. Right-of-way is an issue, and right-of-way would likely be necessary along that stretch, and that's one thing that we're defining now. But we'd ideally like to see an 8-foot wide sidewalk. The idea being that along that stretch of sidewalk on Jackson Street, it's not the traditional width for a multi-use trail or bikeway, but given that link to the school, it's primarily unidirectional, one-directional, to the school in the morning and away from the school in the afternoon. So there's some flexibility for just how wide we make that. Oh, went dead on me. The black lines in this location depict some potential realignment of the curb lines. If you were to go out there today, you could actually see where the plow marks are, where traffic's using it today, and there's still additional width beyond it to the curb line. And we're looking at the potential for 2 speed tables or raised crosswalks that would go to calm traffic along Jackson Street and really provide defined crossing locations. One here at the driveway and one very close to the existing crosswalk location in front of the school. There are some I failed to mention one thing. This photo on the right has been modified to show striping on the roadway, which is not there today, to try to better define lanes, and especially the shoulder or the edge of the road. Along with the grass buffer strip here, it's another identifier for traffic, and frankly for the pedestrians as well, to give them feelings that they're in their own space. Striping also goes to visually pinch the road and has been known to reduce some speeds, especially on collector roadways. This is just a snapshot of what the city's already put together for the ramp connection. Jackson Street is on the left side, north is up here, looking at a new ramp connection from the bikeway, transitioning in grade, raising in grade up to the sidewalk. I understand from Mr. Fiden that they will be discussing the potential right-of-way needs for that, along with the widening of the Jackson Street sidewalk within the ensuing 2 to 3 weeks. When we look at speed tables and raised crosswalks, there is guidance. There's a document published by ITE, the guidelines for the design and application of speed humps. Speed tables and speed humps are used interchangeably, although they're a little bit different. Speed hump is a parabolic shape or a slight vertical curve that's roughly 14 feet long. A speed table, you can really consider a tabletop, where it has a transition up a relatively flat portion and then transition back down to grade. It's depicted within some of these details, and this is actually a typo. The recommended height is anywhere from 2 3/4 inches to 3.5 inches, and there's a range. They do recommend that there be careful consideration along primary response routes, and that's one of the reasons why tonight is very helpful to have a discussion, because there is flexibility, and you wisely brought up the fact that there are other tools in the toolbox to consider, which could be textured pavements, or even a reduction in the height profile. Instead of, say, 3 inches, 1.5 inches or 2 inches, if that's acceptable to the emergency response personnel, to try to look at the balance between pedestrian access and safety and emergency response, because they are both critically important. But there's enough guidance that's brought to this with engineering standards that does allow for flexibility along emergency response routes. Knowing that there is that balance, obviously there'll be continued discussions to make sure that whatever solution's out here and wrapped up in a final report is something that the community buys into. We did have an opportunity to pull together some examples. We were aware, and in fact, Amherst is another community, and although they entered the program, the Safe Routes to School program, much later than Northampton did, we just recently did our first visit with the community and with the school. We had heard some of the concerns about the speed tables, and I had an opportunity to visit out there again today before coming to Northampton to see what some of the characteristics were. It's a little bit of a different atmosphere there. They certainly have a greater number of them in a row, but they also have more of a slope to the roadway. There are some elements, and I believe those were designed at 4 inches high based on our discussions with town personnel. And those are slightly higher than what the recommended maximum height is. I'm not familiar with what process they went through, if the designers for the college met with emergency response personnel before doing it. But I do understand that there are a lot of concerns in moving forward with any future ones in Amherst, and how they may relate to what is being discussed here in Northampton. This is just a snapshot of one of the ones from Amherst. You're probably familiar with the locations, but they're complemented with the warning signs in advance. Some of them have the in-pavement lights. I don't believe they're all working right now. That's one of the things that is a great idea. It's typically a better idea for communities like Florida or warmer climates. Only because of the maintenance. When you get road salt and sand, having to clean those out, having plows that go over them multiple times every winter, there's been a mixed review of the effectiveness of the lights long term. Certainly, when they first go in, they provide some of that visual notification that something's happening. What's important with any of the discussions about traffic calming devices, whether it be speed tables, flashing lights, modifications in striping, bump outs of curbs, we want to present a different atmosphere that makes motorists understand that they're in an important pedestrian space rather than just a through collector street. We also had an opportunity to discuss with some folks from Cambridge because they've implemented a number of speed tables, speed humps, and entire intersections that are raised. These are just a few examples. Jen, I think you just got this one that last weekend, right?
I think it was maybe even Monday.
One in Chelmsford. You can see the profile of the road changes. This is the ramp up to the platform, which is right here. You can see the crosswalk markings, and it goes back down to grade on the other side. That has a change of grade of between 3 and 4 inches as well. and that's located on a collector roadway.
And that's about 8 years old too. That's been there for a while.
Another example from Nashua, New Hampshire. I had this long discussion with the city engineer about his thoughts, because they went through a process to make sure that they looked at the design criteria, given response routes, given the effectiveness of plowing. They see about as much snow as Northampton does. But you might see differences in pavement markings, but the design is still generally the same. These are about 3 inches high at its highest point off the roadway. This is a draft. We met with school personnel and other parent coordinators for the Safe Routes to School program today, with Laura and with Wayne Fiden, and with Jim Cope from EOT. We are looking to finalize this document, and tonight's input, not only from emergency personnel but the public, is important in shaping this final document so that we can march into final design. I already mentioned that funding is secured. We have 100% Safe Routes to School funding. It's a separate program set up by the federal government with its own pot of money. But there's also an opportunity with the federal stimulus here that is what you've heard about from President Obama, to try to spur the economy. And that there's certain projects that may be closer to design and construction than others. And this may have an opportunity to pick off, all the recommendations in our list versus the top 1 or 2. And we should have more definition on that within the next couple weeks. We do need to perform survey to identify the right-of-way and what's going to be necessary to get all these pieces together. We anticipate moving into final design in April, and then issuing any plans to the city and to Mass Highway for review at the same time. But the hope is to advertise for construction through Mass Highway for public bid as soon as possible, hopefully early summer.
What does that mean, right-of-way operation?
If there's any adjustments in the right-of-way that may be necessary, one of the examples of that would be the sidewalk along Jackson Street. Go back to briefly. See if this is working. Okay. Although we haven't had an opportunity to verify that, we believe the right-of-way line, or the difference between the publicly owned street and the privately owned property, is somewhere near the back of the sidewalk today. If that sidewalk was to widen, it would be widening into private property. And in order to spend federal funds on the project, it has to be public property. So there may be a need for working with the adjacent property owner or owners to identify either a permanent easement or a potential change in the right-of-way. That would involve compensation. I'm just about done. We continue to perform the assessments, but we will be looking to do a final version of this assessment in Northampton. We do need local, state, and federal approval through Federal Highway. We do a constructability review through our construction partner to make sure that there are limited opportunities for change orders during construction, make sure that things are moving as quickly as possible. And then before we do any work, we do a pre-construction audit to essentially assess how many children are walking and bicycling to school pre-improvements, and then we come back later to do a post-assessment to see if there's any increase because of these specific pieces of infrastructure. And lastly, just provided contact information. Jim Cope was here earlier this afternoon for the meetings. His office is in Boston. He is manager of this program out of Boston. My office is in Lawrence, and we are the consultant for EOT, managing all these different school assessments. So I'm accessible for any questions, even after this meeting, for anything that you might think of that might come
said. Thank you, Kevin. So I guess at this time, it's we'd like to hear from everybody in the audience. If you have any questions or concerns, this is your chance. Raise your hand and.
Just a clarification on that, on the Amherst speed bumps that were causing the problem. Those weren't the ones on Route 9, they were the ones on Route 116. Is that true, or is it?
No, those are the ones on Route 9.
That you showed next to
Yes.
Buckley Hall?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, this is one of the ones on Route 9.
This lady over here with the black sweater.
Hi, I'm from the Bay State community and drive quite a bit along that Jackson Street route, and also live at the corner of Riverside and Federal. And I may be in the wrong place. If you're only interested in making things safer for pedestrians, what I'm about to say may not be pertinent, but not all children can ride or bike to school. And especially at that high school, we're drawing in from a very big space, and we've got a lot of people driving. So independent of other times of the day when there's a lot of dangerous activity happening at those two intersections, Jackson and Prospect, and Riverside and Federal. I'm puzzled that nobody has brought up that low-tech concept called a four-way stop or a stoplight. Because I don't see traffic calming helping a teenager late from school, not, going right past Federal, cutting off as somebody's walking a dog. I know at our corner, if we simply added to this work that you're doing, I know there's a study in place, and I'm curious if the study will include collecting accident reports for those two intersections. And then we'll all recognize, of course, that there must be some formula that expands on that actual accident report to all the unreported and near misses. In our area, it's very severe. So, and I actually drive way from, I make a right turn up Prospect to avoid trying to get across Prospect. I'm so afraid of getting hit. So, can you speak to those two?
Certainly, I can give you some history, and Lauren maybe can help as well, but the intersection of Jackson and Prospect has been looked at by the Regional Planning Commission with the city for a number of years. There are a number of options that have been discussed over those years, including the potential for a signal. And I understand that there was a previous study that had suggested that the signal warrants for installing a traffic signal may be met. Just this afternoon we talked about how a four-way stop may be a future thing to consider as well. As part of this program, we're probably going to be looking at improving some of the crosswalk signage and the striping for the crosswalks, which don't exist today across Prospect. But we're not looking at wholesale intersection reconfiguration, primarily due to the expense, because once you pull all those different curve lines in and reshape the intersection, it's likely going to be a number that would be too big for this program to bite versus waiting to see the fruition of the planning process with Pioneer Valley. Because when was it that the study was done?
That was done in 2002 by the PDPC for the Jackson Prospect Street intersection. And I believe what you're talking about is the traffic calming request from the Riverside Drive. Is that where you're from? Did you say Riverside
Well, yes,
Drive? Yeah.
yes.
So I'm going to actually be doing some traffic counts out there as part of an engineering study. It was brought, the traffic calming request was brought to the Transportation and Parking Commission, and it was voted to have an engineering study done, but I have to wait until I can actually put traffic counters in the road, so I have to wait.
I saw that in the newsletter,
Mhm.
but what puzzled me is that even if you sat there, and I don't know if traffic counting means just number of cars or speed. Are you measuring speed?
It would actually be for volume, speed, and axle classification.
Okay, but there is some really sit down at a desk computer job of looking at the accident records.
Yep, I've collected
Will that be
those
part
too.
of that?
Yes, it will, yep.
And what you're saying to me, because I'm gonna leave now, if this is only going to be about crosswalks, it's another committee altogether who's gonna decide if we can just put in a cheap four-way stop that can't cost a lot of money at Jackson and Prospect.
Let me address that just for a second. The four-way stops, and the reason they don't like to use it, especially on a heavy traffic street, probably most of the people in here go up in Prospect or Jackson at some point. Those are such heavy travel streets that if everybody was stopping, that would be a nightmare. It really does need a traffic light.
It does.
And I think over the years, we're talking maybe 10 years ago, it's really changed a lot. I think re-looking at that, and that's what I think Pioneer Valley is going to do, and hopefully one of these days they're going to get the numbers, see the numbers have gone up, and hopefully then someday that will change. I think there's a lot of people in the city who would love to see that, a traffic light there. It's cost factor. It's very large. The city can't do it on its own. They need the help from the state money. That's what it really
Okay,
comes
but
down
then the Riverside Federal is not that big an intersection, and that could benefit from something as simple.
I think other alternatives as well, and that's the process that Laura's explaining that the traffic committee is doing, is they're trying to attack, and there's a lot of built-up things over the years I think people have wanted to address. And the traffic calming manual here, and the way they're going to do it here, I think is really addressing that in a smart way with the public hearings and getting, instead of going out the old way was to go yell at the city councilor, who would go out and tell a DPW, put 4 stop signs up there. And a couple of times it's worked in the past. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit, the one they put on Hatfield Street in North Elm. Everybody said that's going to be a nightmare, people are going to get killed. It worked. I travel that route every day, I live in that area, and it's, it's worked. Same with Florence Road, it's worked. There's certain locations where it doesn't work, and it needs another look and another ideas, like I say, there are a lot of ideas out there right now for the traffic calming, the tables, just sometimes the markings of the roads really do help. So that's what I think they're working on real hard here and have been for the past 9-10 months doing so.
The other thing I wanted to add to that is our policy, our traffic policy, transportation policy in the city also requires, and it's something that happened after that study by PVPC, is to do not only an analysis for a traffic signal, but also for a roundabout. And that's been a modern roundabout, which is something that we've adopted as an engineering policy to really look at. We're in 75% design, almost 100% design on a modern roundabout at Route 9 and Bridge Road near Look Park. And we really want to make sure that when we look at an intersection, we look at the traditional stop signs and traffic signals, but we're also going to look at that roundabout analysis, because that intersection is so misaligned that we think it might have potential for that as well. So we are looking at it, but what Officer Trushaw said about the funding piece, I don't think the city of Northampton has paid for a traffic signal since like the 1960s. We're totally dependent on state funding for that magnitude of a project. So we try to get these projects in the queue. So the North Maple Street was one of the most recent ones where a signalization took place.
Excellent.
Which it's made a difference.
These improvements you're
32
talking
years
about, all the
Exactly.
work.
And then the next one that's being worked on is the one at Bridge Road and Route 9 near the park. We have one at Route 10 and Earl Street, which will be coming under construction. So there's sort of a process that we have to follow, getting on the state's engineering plans, getting into the tip process and getting a mass highway approved, because it's just not something that we have the local resources to fund ourselves. So, but we are looking at it.
All right, wait a minute now. She's already addressed that point, and she said, now there's a simple thing at Riverside Drive and Federal, and then you can put up a stop sign there and do accident analysis, which I have asked for, and I've lived here for 11 years, and every year there's an accident at that intersection.
At Riverside and
Federal, more than one.
And I've been almost killed myself there, just trying to cross the street.
Yep.
So
and that is what
that is a simple, cheap solution.
Why can't we do that temporarily until we get the
Because we have
sophisticated
federal
thing?
warrants that in Massachusetts we're required, the federal engineering warrants that are promulgated by ITE, and in Massachusetts, we cannot arbitrarily put up a stop sign unless we meet those warrants, which requires an engineering study, it requires the data to support it, so.
And that's paid by who? That study? I mean,
Well, that's what
he
Laura's
and I
gonna
don't
be
know each
doing.
other, but I think we're going to probably be married after this meeting. And we'll attack together. But I want to know who to follow up with. I'm not satisfied, with all due respect, that, and someday, with a little luck,
I
it'll
got hit
happen.
there myself. okay?
What?
I was in an accident there myself,
All right,
because
and
someone ran
so-
the stop sign, so
So
I
we
do
have
know
to
there's
cut
no
through.
stop sign there.
There are stop signs on Federal
Right.
and none on Riverside,
Right.
and it's a blind turn. And so I have people making left turns onto Federal. They can't see us walking across.
Again, there's
People
lots
are
of
gonna get
issues, a
killed.
line of sight issue there.
Very
There's a-
big.
There's a hill coming down,
Yes.
stop sign at the bottom of a hill in the winter, tough. Okay, there's other things to look at, I think, other than putting up 4 stop, this is one of the ones I'm saying. Alex lives right up the street, I'm not sure a stop sign there would be a proper thing to do. I think there's other things that you can do there that would improve it.
And that's why when your neighborhood submitted the traffic calming request for the end of the year, we had a hearing on it, we agreed that there was an issue, and we went ahead and approved having the DPW do an engineering analysis, which is
Very
going to look at
grateful
all
that
those
you're doing
issues.
that.
Which it's
Very
good,
grateful.
it's good they put it off too, because if they did it earlier, Clement Street wouldn't have been open. Now Clement Street's back open, and that problem's gonna get worse up there. I mean, you know,
Yes.
when Clement Street's open, that's a much busier street.
Yes.
So that, you know, actually, it's a good thing they didn't do it earlier, because they would've went up there and says, well, there's just not enough traffic here. This summer, there's gonna be a lot of traffic there, because people are gonna get used to using Clement Street again, which is a whole other issue.
So, if we could try to get back a little bit to Jackson Street and sort of the issue of raised, just generally the issue of raised structures, I think that would be a good thing. If people have comments about this issue of raised structures like speed tables.
Yeah.
So here and then James.
Because I'm puzzled.
Could you just give your name
Oh, my
and
name is
address?
Tilly Friedrich, and I live on Meadow Street. And I'm curious about the seemingly restriction to talking only about speed bumps as a way of traffic calming. Because I come from a neighborhood in another city which was very congested, and it was the same kind of problem. And we had a lot of discussion about other forms of traffic calming, not stop signs, because stop signs apparently do not calm traffic. They just make them stop and then they speed off again. And the trick is to keep them going slowly. They did things, for instance, like putting, at intersections, putting,
Neck downs.
is that what they're called? They put a circle and they planted flowers in them. I mean, they made the cars physically slow down to get around that. If they did speed bumps, they put brakes in the speed bumps, timed to the width of the emergency vehicle's tires, so that if you knew what you were doing, you could zip through, but most people didn't, except the emergency vehicles did. They did things like narrowing the streets down so that they became only like 1.5 lanes or maybe barely 2 lanes wide. Again, causing cars to not just think, oh, here's a place I can just shoot through. And I'm wondering to what extent you have thought about any of those alternate ways, rather than sort of butting heads about will we wreck the ambulances or not?
We have considered all the different options, and I don't think there's any butting heads because no decisions have been made.
No, but I worked in
Um,
state government long enough to know when I see a head butting in the offing.
There are other options as well. There are other options that make more noise, like rumble strips, which may not be appropriate for the residential neighborhood near there. Narrowing the pavement width. Jackson Street is not excessively wide today. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but I want to say it was approximately 24 feet wide. Once you stripe shoulders, and if you have what's considered a narrow lane of 10 feet, then that only leaves you 2 feet on the side. There are liability issues with putting a fixed object in the middle of an intersection. Certainly where it's part of a plan design with a modern roundabout, that's a different issue because it's an actual traffic control device. But if there's another large planter, it has to conform with some standard, something that's defensible for the city down the road as well, because this will remain the city's infrastructure. But I think with the mix of striping changes, the potential for something at the crosswalks, and even with the potential for some vertical elements, even if it's minor, it can be coupled with the flashing pedestrian warning assemblies.
It only has to be minor, but I'm more concerned, with all the respect to the problem of the school, I'm concerned about the overall problem in the city. Because the traffic calming manual doesn't talk about the school particularly, it talks about generally what are we going to do, and the impression I get is that either we can put a speed bump here or we can't do anything. And that's what I'm concerned about.
There's a lot of alternatives.
As long as you're considering other alternatives, because I live on a street that is a dead, well, you know it because you did speed bumps on it. It's a straightaway down a hill and everybody goes 55 miles an hour. And I'm convinced that if you just put something up that made them say, whoa, we can't do this, that the traffic would slow down.
Yeah, and certainly the scope of my work is really limited to the Jackson Street School,
Right.
so.
And I understand that.
And I just want to assure you that we have a bigger toolbox than
Okay.
that. Our intention is to look at all the options, and we've done some of them actually in the city already, a lot of road narrowings and things to that effect, so it's not just speed humps.
Okay.
So there was one other question here, and then some other comments over here.
Yeah, earlier there was a comment about the speed bumps causing damage to the emergency vehicle. And there's obviously going to be some weighing of this damage versus what it protects. And so if you get someone killed in this crosswalk, is that really saving you from saving someone? You know, where do you draw the line here? And the other thing I was wondering about is the primary and secondary emergency routes that are these are crosswalks having these bumps in. You wouldn't want those there because you got to make time doing this. Is this something that is laid out in common information that this is a primary emergency route? Do real estate people know this and tell people when they're buying a house that says this is a primary emergency route, you're going to have no speed bumps at all on this road now?
So we haven't made again, when we developed the manual, we didn't make a clear-cut policy determination that there won't be, traffic calming devices here versus here. That's part of why we're having this discussion tonight, because we were careful to say we really wanted to look at things on a case-by-case basis, and we really wanted to make sure that we brought public safety into the conversation. And so that's part of what this is kind of the test case for that conversation.
Well, the other thing I want to raise on this also, pardon me, that there's speed bumps on the road that goes up to the back of the hospital. I don't know if you've been up that. And I mean, so if you're talking about emergency vehicles getting to the hospital, right on that road that goes right to the hospital, there are these speed bumps. So obviously, somebody's made a decision to put them right there.
Well, those are probably not in the city's roadway. Those
They're
are probably
not.
on private property, like in a traffic, like in a shopping mall or something. And I don't know, maybe you can address that as a respondent.
Those speed bumps are on the backside of the hospital, and that's not the main entrance into the emergency room for these ambulances we've been talking about. Typically, what you'll see, if you do ever encounter ambulances going that way, typically the majority of the time, it's when they aren't patient loaded. Typically, if they're en route to the emergency room, they'll come in the main entrance up off of Locust Street, and up there you don't have those speed bumps that you're talking about.
So James and then Alex.
Hi, I'm James Lowenthal. I live on Crescent Street. I I sit on the Transportation and Parking Commission, and I also sit on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee. And I participated at an early stage in helping get zeros to school, working here at Jackson Street. And I am a dad of a kindergartner, and I primarily bike and walk for transportation. I live less than a mile from Jackson Street School. I bike along there myself all the time. Brought my daughter one of the times myself. So I'm
Will you be autographing that photograph?
I was gonna say, weren't you in the paper?
I want to look at that. And so I'm well aware of all the hazards along Jackson Street, and I'm delighted that so much attention is being paid to the issue. I devote a huge amount of my own time to exactly the same issue. And thanks for everybody's commitment to try and find the best common safety. I am confident that this conversation will lead to an improvement. There might be compromises, but I think that it's going to be a big improvement. So Safe versus School addresses this, as you mentioned, this terrible trend where a generation ago, 50% of school children biked or walked to school. And now, just 25 years later, there's been a precipitous drop. It's gone from 50% to 10%. And the system is broken. And the number one reason that people don't bike or walk is because they're afraid of traffic. So they get in their cars and they make more traffic. So we have a terrible vicious cycle, and we have to break that cycle. And I think Safe versus School is a great job of addressing that head on. So, and I like everything that you suggested in your report, which I've read. I think changing the over-wide turning radii at the intersections and the driveways is fantastic. The widening of the sidewalk is crucial. I think the stripes are good. I think the ramp from the bike path is tremendously important, and terrific if we can use some of the monies for that. And I think I really urge the city to take full advantage of this opportunity. And let's not blow it, because we've been trying so hard for so many years to get traffic calming of any kind in this city, any kind. For 10 years we've been trying to get traffic calming, and it has been so painfully slow. And this seems like a great opportunity to go all the way at least once and see what happens. And if we put something in that doesn't work, we can take it out. But at least let's put it in and make it a good test. So specifically, what's going on there at Jackson Street, what I think about all the time is that the number one cause of death for Americans under the age of 35 is car crashes. And 11% of those, roughly 42,000 deaths a year, are pedestrian deaths, about 5,000 pedestrian deaths a year. A lot of them are kids, disproportionate number of kids. The chance of getting killed in a car crash as a pedestrian is about 50% if you're hit at 30 miles an hour. If you're hit at 35 miles an hour, it's much worse. 35 miles an hour, I think, is probably below the 85th percentile speed on Jackson Street. So, anybody crossing Jackson Street, you're really taking your life in your hand just by crossing the street. And so, slowing the traffic on Jackson Street is crucial. It's critical. And traffic calming works. It saves lives, and it's been shown again and again. There are many studies that show how the crash rate goes down, the speeds go down, survivability goes up. Even if you do get hit, you're much more likely to survive. So it works. Specifically, the speed tables and other race structures, I know it's a big focus for me tonight. They have been shown in many, many studies to be the best. We do have this big toolkit here. We're talking about narrowing the street. We're talking about possible textures, signage. But in the toolkit are race structures, and they have been shown by virtually every study I've read to be the most effective at slowing the traffic. For instance, we had a study here on State Street done by the engineering department at UMass, which concluded again after extensive research that the raised structure would be the best at slowing traffic at speed. There's a big range in designs in those raised structures. I'm aware of I was at the test on Meadow Street, and I realized that that was not a very fun test for you guys in your trucks. And that looked like a red flag went up, as far as I can tell. You don't want that. It's going to damage the trucks. It's going to slow you down too much. My feeling is that test was not a good representative test for all of speed humps, and I want to distinguish between those and speed bumps. And the speed bumps are the ones that there's no choice. Speed bumps look like that, and speed humps have a curve like that. That's much smoother to begin with, and usually they're much longer. I think the temporary speed humps that were tried on Meadow Street had a really pretty rough edge and a pretty steep incline, and I think we should really keep on the table, so to speak, the speed tables or other designs that have smoother approaches and smaller profiles. And there are examples. I actually brought some pictures with me, but since you already showed them, I don't need to. There are speed tables all around the country and speed humps all around the country, and in many communities. And so I think there's a huge range of examples for us to learn from. We shouldn't just limit ourselves to the test we did on Meadow Street or to examples of Amherst. Regarding stoplights, those I'm really dubious about, and I would hate to see a stoplight go on Jackson Street and Prospect Street. Those have been shown to decrease safety, not increase safety. They tend to make people speed to try and catch the light. You increase the speeds, you don't increase safety. So it does control the traffic in terms of right-of-way, but it does not increase safety in general. And I don't think it's appropriate to. Roundabouts, on the other hand, not rotaries, but modern roundabouts like the one in Ziegler Park, typically have reductions of 50 to 90% in crash rate and severity. That's what we want to do. We want to slow the traffic down, reduce the number of crashes and severity of crashes. And we have been talking about a roundabout here, a mini roundabout, for years and years. And it's such a shame to hear that we don't have the money now with $500,000 of 100% federal funding, possible stimulus funding, that we don't have the money even to do a temporary roundabout there with bollards and rubber curbs. Couldn't we consider that rather than going for a fully designed, full concrete curbing roundabout? Couldn't we try a temporary one that at least would demonstrate its efficacy? And finally, just to address the issue of weighing the risks, I just wanted to echo the view that we really need to think about this holistically in terms of public safety. While the primary emergency responders clearly need access every place, there are various studies that show typically a race structure, like the ones we're talking about, will slow down emergency response vehicles on the average of 10 seconds or less apiece. And so we weigh a 10-second delay, which has a tiny increase in risk to patients in the ambulance, or you may disagree that this is what I've seen says. Slightly longer response time to a fire versus a dramatically improved, enhanced safety situation for pedestrians. And we know what the numbers are for those improvements. They're measured, dramatic. And, in my view, we should do it. We should try to find a compromise. That's not going to break the trucks, and that will still let you get access to Jackson Street. But I think we should try it.
Thanks, James. I think Alex was next, and then Peter back.
I'm Alex Diesel, 164 Riverside Drive. James has said everything I wanted to say in a much calmer, rational voice. I really don't. A couple of questions. One, how many structure fires were there last year in the city?
134.
Okay. How many deaths?
There was one death.
Fire-related death?
Fire-related death after the fact.
About the year before?
Well, we've been actually fortunate that there have been none in 10 years other than that.
10 years. There are about three deaths a year in automobile accidents in the city, year after year after year. And the other, in Amherst, the experience in Amherst was a political decision. Amherst College is an enormous asset. Kids there. The city made a choice. Made a choice to say, we're going to slow emergency vehicles, we're going to slow everybody down because the cost was too high, the risks were too high. The same, the city has sort of made it in front of Smith College. These are political decisions. We we take risks by not starting to plow as soon as the snow starts to fall. We could keep these roads totally clear. We want to put the assets in, we take risks. So I see where you're coming from, and I understand your point, but I'm just exactly like James. This is a political compromise. I'm hoping that we can find something that you guys can find acceptable.
Well, let me respond to that, Alex. I don't think we'd be here if we weren't trying to work with people on this. It would have been very easy for me to just send a letter and say, we're against raised structures, period. But we've taken the time and invested our assets and resources into doing tests that Laura had set up. We've taken the time to do research, and the reason we're here is to try and work fundamental solutions that balance that risk. If you remember my original comments, the first thing I said is, this is a risk management decision. We need to balance the risk to pedestrians to the risk to vehicles, to response time, and we need to do it in a public way that everyone is aware of what those risks are. And that's why we're here.
Great.
I think Peter McLean is next.
Peter McLean, 298 Riverside Drive. Glad to see the Bay State Village is so well represented tonight. I just spent a week in Toronto again. I end up talking about Toronto a lot, it seems, when we talk about traffic calming. It's where I grew up. And Toronto is very aggressive in traffic calming devices, procedures, and things. So I spent a week negotiating speed bumps, speed humps, speed platforms, narrow streets, street furniture, numerous bike paths. Even in the snow, they have snow there too. They also have fire trucks, police trucks, and ambulances. Is there something we can learn from other communities, not specifically Toronto, because you mentioned these things are all over the place, cross country and in all sorts of places where there's winter. And no doubt the police, fire personnel, ambulance personnel have had to deal with this same conversation. Is there anything that we can learn, or is anybody aware of anything that we can pick up from other communities that would have had this same kind of conversation?
Well, we did the research for the traffic calming manual. We did look at other communities, and it was sort of there was a spectrum. I mean, some communities did it by road classification, where they said certain types of traffic calming measures are appropriate, you know, on a collector street versus a secondary road. So they made distinctions that way. Others did look at this issue of primary safety routes, and then other communities sort of did what we're doing, which is doing a case-by-case analysis and trying to weigh the benefits and the risks. So you may have more experience in terms of how this is done in other parts of the country as well.
Yeah, there are a number of communities, you know, in some cases, you know, it does require collaboration, you know, where it's part of the due diligence that we did before coming tonight to do some phone interviews with some of the folks from other cities where we know that they've been successfully installed and maintained in major communities. And I think it's important to show that there are successes out there, and it involves collaboration with our team and with the emergency services to make sure that it's the right tool here on Jackson Street. That's our focus, but I understand that you have, you know, the citywide focus of other requests that may come in, and I heard Riverside a couple times that, you know, there are other areas that may require study, and it's prudent that, in my mind, that you do it on a case-by-case basis, because no roadway is the same, no traffic volume pattern is exactly the same either, so it's a prudent way to assess it, and it also gets people talking on numerous occasions. I think the chiefs expressed flexibility, and certainly we have a number of tools in our toolbox as well to help try to improve safety for pedestrians. And we'll continue to have discussions to help shape what this final product will look like. If it involves a vertical element, you know, that's great, but we can also discuss other potential warning devices as well.
Yes, sir.
I'm David Payne from Northampton. Are there any studies that correlate, say, the different tools that you do have? Say, lowering the speed table to 2 inches instead of 3, correlation with that and their effectiveness as a traffic calming measure?
Well, I can tell you that there is a lot of guidance within this document that talks about the effectiveness of not only a singular element, but a series of humps that were looked at a variety of heights. It's information that was compiled from a number of different areas around the states, but they do provide guidance, and just as a sample table from the guidelines here, the operating speeds traversing speed humps. For a 12-foot parabolic speed hump that's 3 inches high is 20 miles per hour. For a 14-foot wide, so a more gentle arc that's 3 inches high, is 23 miles per hour. For a 22-foot wide speed table, so the approach, flat spot, and then approach back down the grade, that's 3 inches high, is 30 miles per hour. And then if you have one that's 22 feet high, 22 feet long, 3 5/8 inches high, it drops it down to 25 miles per hour. So there are guidelines based on data, and that's generally for passenger car traffic. There's a section in the document specifically related to emergency response, and it does say that the installation of devices on primary response routes should be reviewed with personnel, because it's different in each community and what impact that might have on response times.
Excuse me, what happens if you go to 2 inches? Does it have no effect then?
There's no guidance except to say that essentially the more severe it is, the slower it will have traffic operating.
No, less severe.
No, exactly. The guidance in here, it doesn't specifically say that a 2-inch speed table will have certain operating characteristics. What's important for me here at Jackson Street is that we create a different environment. And obviously part of that environment is emergency response. And if there's flexibility, and there is flexibility in the guidelines, to have less. I think the real critical element is not to go higher, because
No. The question is, can you go lower so that they will be happy?
Well,
and
exactly.
you still slow the traffic down enough.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason we propose 2 is so that's not an isolated event where somebody has a blip on the screen and they start flying again. We want to make sure that it's essentially a zone. And if we ended up with a reduced profile of those, it's still a drastic improvement over what we have today.
Jim Laurel in the back. Jim Laurel at 285 Logan Street. I'm the city engineer. Just a couple of comments. I think James made some really good points about the amount of time that the city has been working toward trying to implement traffic calming, and the basic lack of funding to get things done. It's maddening, and I think the Safe Routes to School does pose a great opportunity for us to try something and to implement something. And there's certainly a lot of concerns. The chief had described a number of the concerns, and I think as a community we have a very big challenge here. We have an opportunity where we have funding. We have an opportunity to look at traffic calming, but in terms of picking a street in town to look at instituting traffic calming, I think we picked probably one of the most difficult streets because it's a primary response route. So it's a great opportunity, but it's a challenge. And personally, I think it would be great if we could come up with some type of geometry that has worked in another community that was satisfactory to fire departments and their equipment, knowing that it wouldn't cause damage, but doing something other than, I would hate just to see a spray painted crosswalk or something that doesn't push the bar. I think we need to advance where we are as a community and take the opportunity that we have through this program to get something built and see how it works, keeping in mind that the chief has been kind enough to come tonight and sort of advance the conversation about it. But it really is an opportunity, and I'd like to see the solution be one where we sort of push the bar where we are as a community and not step back and do something safe and play it too safe, because I think we really do you know, it's very rare when we get the opportunity to build something and we have funding to do it.
No match.
Can I actually ask you a question quickly, Jim? Maybe you can, because I'm thinking up at the State Hospital redevelopment on the new access road where where one of the bike and ped trails crosses. I noticed they just installed sort of a speed. I think it's more of a speed hump, although there's a crosswalk across it. It's not quite an actual speed table with a flat table. But it is a raised structure that has the traditional chevron markings leading up to it, and there's a raised element to it. I was just curious. That's another variation on that, and it's in a crosswalk setting. It's obviously not on a main, 30-mile-an-hour rated street, but you may be able to take a look at that as a test area to see what a lower profile raised structure how that might react to vehicles.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, one of the important elements is that we look at the guidance from IT, but we also have to conform with the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and architectural code requirements for slopes. And once you create that platform, you can't have more than 1.5%. It's essentially very flat, and just enough pitch to have drainage in order to provide an appropriately designed crosswalk. And then where we touch the sidewalks on either side, we need the tactile warning surface, the truncated domes that allow the texture for visually impaired folks to know that there is a crossing right in front of them.
We have them on Ridgewood, actually.
Oh, you do?
Because we just redid Ridgewood a few years ago, so we have them.
That's great. So there are different elements that we take in, and we'll certainly take a look at what the design criteria was for the new ones up there at the State Hospital.
Can I step out of my police thing real quick and jump into the audience? Pretend I'm over there. I noticed when you were doing the sidewalks, there's no mention of Bridge Road. Is that in there? That's been an issue. I know any of us that live in town know that police crews have to follow someone to school every day. It's a major route. There's no sidewalks there for a good distance there. And that would seem to me to be, if you connected the sidewalks that are on Bridge Road to the Jackson Street area, it might be a good idea to improve the walking capabilities or biking capabilities of that area for the kids.
One thing we look at is the potential. We look at some of the outlying residential areas and the potential to draw children to walk on this infrastructure. We did inventory sidewalks on the south side of Bridge Road, and there are some gaps, like this gap right here, which requires children to cross and then come back across Jackson Street again, right from the school. This was listed as a secondary project, and the way things are at the program, and I hinted at it before, is that in order to distribute the state's fund or federal funds managed through the state to the communities, it's really based on need, but also equity and trying to distribute what may be on the order of a couple $100,000 to various communities. With the stimulus potential, we may be able to have upwards of $500,000 to spend in Northampton. It requires very quick design, quick approvals, not only locally, but the state. And they have their own processes, which...
I understand that one. The other thing is, right, where you have the pedestrian traffic there coming out of cutting out of the heights, or the gardens, the little dots.
Yep.
Yep. I do a lot of radar up there.
Okay.
That's where they cross.
Right here, yes. And that was one of the elements of the recommendations that, to keep them from darting in the same alignment of that walkway going straight across. Okay, I'm going to head straight towards the school. I don't care if I'm going at a diagonal.
Bring it down, okay, yep.
Looking at the potential for a fence line on the west side of the street, right through here, to force them down. And we've done that in some other communities. We actually have don't laugh, it's actually, we're looking at an iron fence in the city of Worcester, because they have a pedestrian overpass, and some of the school children come down the stairs to the street level, and there is a crosswalk right there, which we're looking to remove, but to keep from habits continuing, looking at an actual physical barrier, a fence to keep children using the infrastructure that's already in place. And, that's one of the elements that we'll look to do here. The style of the fence, the actual limits of it, that's still in front of us, but the idea is that we need some sort of barrier to force them down the street.
Absolutely.
To the
That was
defined
just, I
locations.
noticed you had it there, because that's where they cross all the time. You'd be sitting there watching, and there they come, you know, in groups of 10 or 15, they just come straight across. They never go down to the guy that's standing waiting for them, because he's too far away.
Yeah, exactly, and we did witness that. In fact, with the driveway location here, there's a busy crossing without a crosswalk, just on the south side of the driveway here.
Is there any concern about the lack of sidewalks on Ridge Road between Jackson and King?
Most of these are commercial properties, so they're not.
There are not children walking from there.
We didn't see a lot of it, and we also, when we have our initial conversations with the school staff and with the parent volunteers for the Safe Routes to School program, we get input from them about, okay, where are children coming from and going to? Where's potential in their eyes? And typically, when cities draw school district boundaries, you know, they'll consider things like busy arterials, and there wasn't a lot of potential in our eyes in creating a connection out to here. It wasn't likely to draw an increase in pedestrian traffic or bicycle traffic. And again, we have to kind of categorize them into primary recommendations and then secondary things, only so we can set priorities for if funding is constrained, what do we tackle first?
Peter, and then
Peter again. Kevin, I just wanted to be clear on a couple of points of your presentation. One, you've said there is funding.
Yes.
Does that mean kind of soup to nuts? We're talking about potential platforms and bumps and sidewalks and...
Planning, which is the element we're in now, through final design and permitting and construction itself, that this is 100% federal from cradle to grave, and that's...
So all the things that you'd outlined in your presentation are feasible in terms of there's money to do it?
What I listed was all the different recommendations. The primary recommendations is to go from the school, encompassing these two crossings, coming down to the bikeway, and then doing this transition, coupled with the potential for some geometric modifications of the driveway itself, and then the striping all along Jackson Street from end to end. That's really the primary recommendation, or sub-recommendations, but other things like the section up on Blackberry. I'm getting my fruits mixed up here. Up here, that section of sidewalk is a secondary measure, as was the section from the school on the west side of Jackson heading out towards.
And when you say do these two crossings that you just pointed out, that is suggesting some sort of street bump platform?
Yes, currently,
Okay.
that's our recommendation.
Yeah.
The design details of which are still in front of us. But this is really the public opportunity to vet some of these ideas. But we still have to go through the engineering detail of you know, the height, the tapers,
Right.
the drainage, which you know would be accommodated with whatever we do.
Can I follow that with a question just about the speed bump part?
Sure.
The only thing I'm hearing is the downside of speed bumps, etc. Well, bumps and platforms and tables. Is the emergency, the issues to do around emergency vehicles. Is there any other downside? I mean, is the, you know, we want a speed coalition not here, or? I mean, I asked that seriously. Is there any other downside to that, having those, that I just am not hearing from anybody?
Well, it certainly calms traffic, but I think that there have been cases in the past with very aggressive ones where noise has been an issue.
That's what we found in our research, that you can find communities, put them in, and then the neighbors, the sound of the cars slowing down, traversing, speeding up, drove people batty. You can go to YouTube actually, and you'll see people who set up cameras of speed humps outside their house, watching cars bottom out and fly over them and lose fenders. And so there has been a slight backlash in some communities, but I think that's what we've learned. The lesson we learned was, if you didn't have this kind of thoughtful planning in advance and really get buy-in from the neighborhood, as opposed to the city just going out and putting these things out there to see what happens. So that's why we really tried to create a program that's sort of grassroots driven.
The temporary ones, I think the ones that we were all going over, I think those are the extreme of they're short, they're quick, they don't have the length that a truck can get over safely. I think there are some out there that would be way more friendly to trucks and vehicles.
So those were Traffic Logic, and what were those 12-foot? We did a 12-foot or a 14-foot table?
It was actually 7 feet wide.
We did a 7, they were short. So that's fairly aggressive compared to what you're talking about. So
That's fair.
One other thing too that can be problematic is with regard to plowing, plow trucks that have to come up and over. But I personally spoke with folks in Chelmsford asking about that issue, and members of our team also spoke with folks in Cambridge with the same thing. All roads that get plowed every winter, they get the same amount of snow as any other road. And both of those communities didn't express any problems with plowing because they educate their drivers on it. Cambridge has a snow plowing manual that they give out, and the Chelmsford engineer that I spoke with, I said, what about the plow drivers? And he said, what about them? they didn't have a problem there. So it's an education thing for them. They know where they are in the city, so it's not like they're coming up on them unexpected. And,
did you talk to the plow drivers or the engineering division?
I didn't talk to the plow drivers themselves, but
the engineers always think it's great.
But the speed, I lived actually very near the one that we were discussing in Chelmsford, and it's on a route that is somewhat through an industrial park with some dense apartment neighborhoods on either end, and it's early on the plow routes. It's always plowed well. There's never any drainage issues where snow has melted and refrozen and nothing like that. So they're able to take care of it, basically.
I think the deputy chief has.
Yeah, please. I think it's important to reiterate also that from the fire department perspective that we're extremely supportive of this project and this concept. And that's why from the very beginning we wanted to participate and help do some of the research involved in this. It would be irresponsible of us if we weren't here just to have the conversation about some of the potential negative impacts associated with these. But looking at it by a case-by-case basis, in this case being the Jackson Street corridor, we've been talking about emergency responses and response times and things like that, which are a concern. But using this area right here, when you consider our responses going up through there, looking at this picture, we're coming up Barrett Street. And what I would almost suggest is, you have the stop sign at Barrett Street anyways, that we're coming to a stop there. The majority of our calls, we're going to take a left on the Jackson Street. So by coming to that stop sign right at the end of that T there, we've come to a stop. It would almost be a suggestion that the closer you can have that speed bump, we can take a left as close to that intersection. We've already come to a stop, so we're going to be getting going slower over that anyways. The speed bump on the other end going towards Bridge Road, that's not that as much of a factor, because if we're going to be going to a Bridge Road up towards that end, we're going to actually come out King Street and go up Bridge Road, and it will totally negate that area.
Okay.
So from our perspective in terms as, is there a consequence for response times? There is, but for this particular case, it could be minimized by having that speed bump, hump, whatever it is, as close to that intersection as possible, because we've already come to a stop, and we take a left, and we can ease over that and continue on.
Yeah, in fact, that location would be, in order to work with drainage and everything else, would probably be, the first edge of the ramp would be within 20 feet or so of the intersection.
Yeah, and the other one down the other way, we might hit it every now and then, but 9 times out of 10, we're going left when we come on Barrett Street.
Usually a bridge.
Otherwise, we're gonna go up King and up Ridge all the way and not even be affected by it.
Okay, wonderful.
I'm John Norton, in Winslow Avenue in the Bay State area, and I drove buses in town for years. Is there any statistic there that relates to the length of the speed table, not a speed bump or table, that relates to axle, the distance between your front wheels and your rear wheels, and how that affects a heavy vehicle in the rhythm of its passage over that? Because if you have a long distance, you're going to have a different kind of, in the axle distance, you're going to have a different kind of rhythm to the vehicle going over the raised section, which will affect how much bottoming out you get.
There is some guidance, there's limited guidance on buses. I guess, question, I don't believe there's any PVTA buses that go up and down Jackson.
Yeah, it is. And as a matter of fact, we're mentioning a fence along the property to keep the children from crossing the wrong place. Yep. The bus presently stops right at that,
Right at
the distant end, the north end.
Right next to that.
And that's because we started off trying to have a bus stop up by Bridge Road, or near Bridge Road, and property owners kept complaining, and we were finally moved all the way down to that spot, and the school didn't complain. But that means that there's not only school children crossing there, but there are transit bus passengers crossing there, and that may have to be taken into consideration, either moving the bus stop or having access.
Yeah, the fence I was talking about would be on the west side, and it would be set back because there's a row of trees there. It would likely be behind the row of trees. So there would still be a platform, and there's no sidewalk on the school side right in here.
Yeah, there's no sidewalk.
So it would be set back a ways.
Yeah, it's easy to move a bus stop, right?
What's
John?
that?
It's easy to move a bus stop, right? Oh, yeah. I said it's easy to move a bus stop, right?
Not necessarily. Oh, you're joking. Another point I'd like to make, the sidewalks sound fine in the summertime, fall, spring, but in the wintertime, I've been a runner and biker for many years, and I don't use sidewalks in the wintertime because the sidewalk, even under the best of conditions when the city hasn't plowed up a lot of snow into it, and the property owners sort of struggling. It becomes, it's like a gully, and the snow melts on the side, and a warm day, and the water flows into the sidewalk. It's held there. There's no drains on the sidewalk, so the sidewalk becomes hazardous in the wintertime, and if you're doing a lot of running or walking, you tend to stay out of there because it's rough. It's usually not completely cleared, and there's this horrible, seemingly insolvable conflict between the city plowing and the property owner trying to keep it clear. Now, the picture you have right there with a curbless, like a sidewalk or a bikeway, that kind of a structure means that the city can plow right up to the grass, and then that area will be clear. The people walking, a lot of people walking, don't feel safe because there's no curb. But,
Actually, we're proposing vertical granite curbing.
yeah,
All along
but because the city could plow right to they plow the walking area or the biking area as well as, and eliminate the problem of the sidewalk, which is like a gully and becomes difficult in the winter.
With anything along this stretch here, that's under our design, to redesign it, because it's only about 4.5 feet wide now, that all of that would be pitched towards the curb line at 1.5% or so. So it would all be drained across that grass panel and then into the gutter line. So that it's not designed to hold any water. It's designed to shed it back onto the roadway so then it can go into the closed drainage system like the catch basins.
Okay, would the city or somebody be responsible for making sure that that is clear so it will drain and you don't have a ridge of plowed street snow along there?
My understanding is that in Northampton, the property owners are responsible for the sidewalks in front, but that's a citywide policy, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The practicality of it is that even the best of people that try to clear their sidewalks still face the problem of the city's snow coming up. You can't throw it back in the street, and it becomes like an iceberg. And I don't know, it seems to me that that sidewalk area along there, if that is put in, then there should be a provision that the city will be responsible for keeping it clear so the water will drain into the street.
I just saw the city engineer's hand go up, so I guys, yeah.
I don't plow myself, but my understanding is that the city takes care of that sidewalk right now. We maintain it and plow it as it is. I mean, that's not to say that we plow it and then snow melts from off the sidewalk and then makes it icy. I don't think we maintain it daily, but during snow events, my understanding is that we do.
We get issues during the day that people bring it up to us. We call DPW, they do take care of a lot of them to do that, so. People let us know.
Yes, ma'am.
Lola Reed, Williams Street. We're talking mainly about main streets here, but the traffic calming application that we're doing is for our side streets. And we have, in our traffic calming committee, talked a little bit about speed humps, and a couple of ideas came up that haven't been bandied around here yet. One being movable speed humps, those rubber speed humps. I don't know if they can be secured enough so that, some kid would not be able to come along and actually move it
Those are the ones we did the test with.
Oh, okay.
They can be anchored, yes.
They can, okay. And the other one is virtual 3D painted speed humps. And I'd like to know if that's been considered by any of you, or what you think of it.
I've seen them. I've seen all variations of, including painted potholes. I mean, literally ones you pick up like Wile E. Coyote. Somewhere else.
Do they come from Ag? Wonderful.
Exactly. I've seen them. So there are a lot of communities that are doing.
We buy those.
I think the research though shows that they may have an early impact, but then people wise up to them after a while.
I've read some literature about them. In fact, I've seen a couple. I know of an example in Manchester, New Hampshire, where they put one in. In fact, they use varying width of bars to give you the impression that you're going faster because of the spacing. And it's an optical illusion, essentially, to get people to slow down. But as you mentioned, it works at first until people become accustomed that it's just a bunch of painted lines on the street. There's really no formal guidance that I'm aware of for that. It's essentially some test sites.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, somewhere in Pennsylvania, didn't they do that all over the city? And they liked them. They said people did get used to them, but then they put them up in different places.
And you'll see in other communities too that they have very creative signs, like "Smiley, you're on radar," and other things that are not quite in the standard manual for signs, but something that gets people to wake up to the fact that they're in a
street signs that people make over the years, those have worked better than any street sign the city can put up. The kids make a sign. Alex's Street was one of the first to do it, and they put these, one lady had a picture of her kid on there and had the kid draw something.
There
he is.
And it was stolen. Old lady.
Someone like that, but that sign really caught people's eyes. I suggested that at South Street. They had another committee, and I said, you know, signs really work. Well, someone owned a sign shop, and he went out and made a bunch of them. Well, they're the same thing as the city said. They're not personalized. The personalized signs really, I think, catch people's eyes and make people think they're in a neighborhood.
Have the kids.
You can put yield signs, and we can put radar signs. And the other thing about speeding up is we'll put that speed trailer out, and I'm guaranteed there's gonna be some 19-year-old kid in his Mustang that he just revved up. He's gonna come down your street doing 110 miles an hour, just so he can see if he can get the 99 on there. It happens every time.
The other thing about the painted elements, you know, we have a hard time just keeping the yellow lines and the crosswalks. They take such a beating. So that would be my one concern, is that if we were going around painting these elements, that they really take a beating with the sand and the snow and the salt.
Visual things are better.
Yeah.
Visual.
So,
And that's one thing too with this program, that with the federal funding, we're able to use longer lasting materials like the epoxy or the thermoplastic, something that's not an annual routine like the paint, to try to make this last as long as possible.
Well, so what about using the kind that you used for your test in a neighborhood, the rubber ones?
we actually that's something we're going to be experimenting with as part of the state hospital redevelopment. We have a case there where there's some funding, a funding source related to the redevelopment, and Laura's been working with their engineers to actually try to obtain some of those for test purposes.
$5 grand for a set.
They're about $5,000 for a set. And Amherst, we actually, the Transportation and Parking Commission had a visit from a UMass researcher who studied Amherst's test of them on Lincoln Street. They have followed that. They bought a set of them, and they had a lot of problems and mixed results. First, they had configured them wrong. You know, they tried to do an array. They had them separated. It wasn't a solid one, and so cars quickly figured out just straddling them. So then they moved them and blocked the bike lane, and then they basically found that you really needed to have a lot of them, and they really didn't have a lot. They had one or two over a really long stretch. So as someone else described earlier, people would slow down, but then they speed up to make up time before the next one. So we're trying to use some of that, some of their experience with it, to really test it out in Northampton. So we are going to try to do that in the future, but starting with the test case up at the state hospital that's being funded by Mass Development.
And I had one more question. With this Jackson Street project, if this is done and there's still, the project is continuing, will there be other school areas that will be?
There is actually, we developed a process for EOT to help evaluate the different schools that are in the program. Right now, it's essentially geared towards one school per community. In fact, I don't recall off the top of my head if there are other schools in
I don't think there are any other schools in Northampton.
Bridge Street,
that
where I'm a parent, we're not eligible, but we have participated in safe route to school activities. We've done walking school buses, we've done some of that activity, but not to the same degree that Jackson Street has.
So the way that works is a school has to be partnered with Mass Strides for a minimum of 1 year before they're eligible for our infrastructure team to come out and take a look at their community. So the Bridge Street School may be earlier on in that process, but the Jackson Street School met that 1 year requirement, and therefore we came here first.
And you have to give a lot of credit to the principal for the hard work that she's done, and the advocates at the school as well. There are a lot of passionate parents there that have done a lot of good things in trying to kickstart the process to encourage children to walk to school already, even without some of the infrastructure elements. And being an early advocate and early in the program has school to where they're at today. And I can tell you that we are the furthest along with the Jackson Street School in Northampton than we are with any others. So you're really on the forefront of this program and getting money spent from folks that are anxious to spend money. So this is
And
a
when
very good
might
thing.
these structures ever be in place?
What's
Any idea about the timetable?
It really depends on how quickly we can work with Mass Highway because of their standard procedure for projects and different review submittals. We're trying to expedite that because these are relatively simple projects. This is not complete road reconstruction. This is not a full signalization project with warrant studies. This is about improving the elements that are already there and supplementing it with other features, traffic calming features. So we're hoping that we can expedite the process. We have a meeting next week to talk about the process, but it ultimately involves review by the city as well. Because although they are federal funds and they're managed by the state, it's for local infrastructure and what will be maintained as local infrastructure.
And we had the folks from Jackson Street who came to our commission early on and talked about the work that they've been doing, and we've been reviewing. So I assume we'll continue to be reviewing it along with the DPW for the city's part of that as well. Alex?
Do you have the money for the ramp if we could secure the right of way?
That's what we're discussing right now. I've had multiple conversations with Hank Friedman in the past week and a half about that, the options of using what the city's already appropriated to try to advance that right-of-way process and that discussion, and then have the program adopt that construction project. One continuous, uniform, consistent piece.
That'd be nice.
We do have CPA money, I think, authorized for that, for the currently.
For purchase, it's for the purchase of the right of way.
Well, it's for purchase and design, and I think it's $50,000, so I'm not quite sure what it all goes to, but yeah. Yes, sir.
Sorry about my lack of protocol. My name is Vern Fath, I live on Riverside. I'm a little calmer now.
See, traffic calming works.
I have a couple of questions about the Jackson Street area, since that's what we're talking about right now. That ramp is on the bottom side of our map up here, and the sidewalk is there, and that forces you to cross over Jackson Street at some point.
Yes.
Is there been any consideration towards putting the ramp on the other side of Jackson Street so that the kids and anybody on that side will stay on that side rather than having to cross Jackson Street?
We did give thought to that, and that's why actually we have a secondary recommendation which goes up to Blackberry and completes that circuit up there. So there's another option for those coming from the west along the bikeway.
Right.
Essentially the back to school. Right along Jackson Street, the very clear desire line has been up this slope. It's also one of the easier ways of making the transition grade with a singular property owner instead of multiple. It also has the benefit of being able to be consistent with the other sidewalk networks, because sidewalks on the west side don't start until Ridgewood. There's sidewalks on both sides, but they don't start until essentially the property corner right here, and then go along the school frontage only. Also, with the folks coming from the south, or going to the south, the school children going to the YMCA in the afternoon, by improving this sidewalk network, the sidewalk does continue on the same side down towards Prospect, at which point we hope to improve the signage and striping for the pedestrian crossing that's there going over towards, I think it's Woodlawn.
Yes.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, if you've been out there, it's already the natural path that people are using.
Exactly, it's well beaten down.
It's a good cow path going there.
Yeah. Well, you can see people use it already as an off-ramp. It's well-worn, that path that the one that people.
That was worn before there was a bike path.
That's true. Yeah, I'm sure you can tell us more stories about that, but.
Well, part B of my question is you were talking about making that an 8-foot wide sidewalk there, and I was wondering, you rather than putting it there. Also, what about 2 sidewalks, one on each side, because that whole section of the neighborhood there still has to navigate that area.
Which neighborhood?
From Jackson Street all the way down to
Down this way.
Prospect.
Right.
And so anybody coming from Prospect, you don't want to necessarily have to have them go all the way back to Blackberry and then come back around.
I think part of the issue there is, you know, I'm sure they take this, then you'd have a bunch of kids crossing here without anybody watching. I think the thought is, get everybody to this point where there's a crossing guard. I think that's
Yeah,
what a lot of that
consolidate
is.
into one
Get them all into one place, because you start the kids walking on this side, and there's no one watching them there, and we have to replace the crossing guards when they're not there. It's not an easy thing to do. If someone's out sick, we have our, you know, standard people there all the time, but if they're out, we have a hard time filling those spots.
My kids went to Jackson Street. I've navigated that whole zoo of people there. But the other thing I wanted to mention was the painted bike lanes, like on the picture to the right there. And then you were talking about a green patch between the sidewalk and the road.
Yes.
And so now right now that sidewalk
That already exists today.
is right up against the road almost there, isn't it?
He's talking about further up Jackson.
Oh, further up Jackson.
Where this photo is
Yeah,
actually
down here.
taken.
Right, and I've ridden my bike, I've walked my kids, that whole lane there. And that's a bit of a scary proposition with that narrow sidewalk there, right up against the road. And so.
There's no buffer. That's correct.
That's right, and if you move that over and put that green path there, yeah, that makes it safer. But now you got what John was talking about, which is what I see on Riverside all the time, is the snowplow throws that snow right up there in that green patch.
Yep.
Between the road and the sidewalk. And yeah, the people might clean their sidewalk, but where do they shovel it? They shovel it right in between the road or they shovel it the other way. Either way, it's plowed up, and you create a blind spot there. People trying to come out of their driveways, the whole people walking there. You can't see little kids on the sidewalks there. That one either.
I don't know. That is a challenging section of sidewalk as well. I think one of the things that's steering us away from that section in trying to introduce a green strip is that we would almost certainly be talking about right-of-way impacts from multiple property owners all the way along, which becomes a more cumbersome process, and with that delays, and that if it's identified as a need, one of the elements of this is that it's used to help identify things that this program will construct, but it also identifies needs down the road as well for things that the city can then use to help program on future tip requests through the Planning Commission that for future state-funded projects. And really, that would be a wonderful tie to the greater intersection improvement project at Prospect and Jackson if no matter what's discussed, whether it's modern roundabout, four-way stop, signal, whatever it may be, that larger long-term improvement could also consider, completing that sidewalk, that improved sidewalk network from the bikeway to the south.
And one other quick question. And along the same line of thinking, you got the painted lines there. So.
Yes.
But I'd like to transfer that down to Route 9 between Smith and Cooley Dick, or even into Florence. That road is so wide, people's speed
There's been discussion about
incredible.
There's actually a whole other study that's going on that the city's working on with Smith literally from downtown all the way up to the center of Florence, looking at that very issue.
And have been looking at it for a long time.
Exactly. Alex was on the
That's right.
Traffic Calming Commission, and I was harassing him when he was in the hot
Things are
seat.
lifetime projects.
Yeah.
So, where were you looking at the one up near Smith College? I mean, we've had one crosswalk there, and there's been 3 deaths in 7 years. That's the worst crosswalk in the city, there's no doubt in my mind. Unfortunately, I have to say that, our investigations have led us to believe that most of the time, it has something to do with the pedestrian. You have If it's something we don't come out publicly in the paper and say, because, you know, some of the bikers, you know, it's something you don't come out and say.
Sure, Darwin has a,
You know,
effect.
someone ran out in front of a car and should have looked. I mean, you don't say that, it's just not a proper thing to do. Sometimes that's the way it is. But there are things that we can do to improve the area. They're definitely being looked at.
The one this year, they were in the crosswalk.
Right. She stepped out in front of a car.
But driver's responsibility.
That's right.
You can't walk from a sidewalk into a street where there's a 1,500-pound car going down the street and expect it to stop on a dime. The car was only going 20 miles an hour. You don't walk out in front of a car. That's a stupid thing to do.
Have no black box.
Texting while
Don't
walking.
know how fast they really go.
That too.
So are there any more comments for our friends?
I just wanted to clarify one thing real quick. You mentioned this was a bike lane. It's actually, we need to classify it as a striped shoulder, only because a bike lane would typically be a minimum of 3, ideally 4 feet wide, and we wouldn't have that width unless we widened the roadway. So it'll be a striped shoulder to better define the lanes and create that visual buffer, but it won't necessarily be Mass Highway standard bike lane.
You have about 2 feet per shoulder there?
Approximately, yes.
Which you could probably ride in something.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
One last question for Kevin. In your presentation, you mentioned measuring success, and you said the number of walkers and cyclists. Just looking at the increase in number of walkers and cyclists to school, and I wondered if that is the sort of yardstick that you anticipate using to measure success of this Jackson Street project.
That is a great question. The criteria for the metrics for measuring success relates to encouragement for walking and biking, but the first word in the program is the other element, which is much more difficult to define quantitatively, which is safety. And there will be some surveys that will be distributed after the fact to also look at, both from the student perspective and other observers, whether or not they believe that they believe that the safety has been improved. And safety is a reality in statistics, but safety is also perception. And that some of the things that you mentioned, sir, about certain statistics about what causes people not to send their kids to school. Traffic safety, physical, personal safety. They don't feel safe walking to school, whether it's in a particular neighborhood, what have you. The statistics that are put out by the National Center for Safe Routes to School identify all that stuff, but it's the ability to encourage kids to walk to school and to make it safe all at the same time.
Anything else? Well, I just wanted to say a special thanks to Laura Hanson from DPW who organized this event and brought everyone together and got this conversation. I think it's been really valuable. And thank you, Laura, very much. And
You're welcome very much.
Thanks to everyone who participated.
Thank you, David and Kevin and Jennifer and Chief Duggan and Chief Doris. Thank you very much.